Green Lantern number 23 from DC Comics sends Hal and his allies to Hell to retrieve a very special artifact, but they'll find getting into Hell is a lot easier than getting out. Let's talk about it in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to Comical Opinions. After reading Green Lantern number 23, I think I like everything that's happening in this issue. There's a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, a lot of urgency, and a lot of tension and drama. I like it all. But there's one point I don't like. I'll talk about that in a second. Hal's visit to Hell is surprising and eventful, and the subplot involving Kyle's scavenger team is shockingly good for where it's been for the last couple of issues, because you get a great space race, and it's not quite as light in tone, which matches the energy of Hal's quest in a big way. That's very helpful. But for that one aspect, which I'll talk about in a bit, Jeremy Adams creates a winner in this issue. Before we get into the details, let's talk about the pros and cons so you see what I'm talking about. Once again, talking about the positives, Jeremy Adams leans heavily into a spirit, I mean that somewhat jokingly, of fun, adventure, and excitement. Hal's trip through Hell introduces a new villain and sets up more developments in the future, potentially with the Spectre, which I'm a big fan of. So if we get more Spectre in the future, I'm all for it. Plus, Adams pulls back on the slightly jokey, lighthearted tone for Kyle's team to match the urgent tension of Hal's quest. Before, there was a bit of a tonal disconnect between the two plots. Here, they're more closely aligned, and it feels like it's more of a cohesive story, tonally speaking. Admittedly, following two plots means neither gets enough room to fully breathe. I wish they would consolidate and stop splitting the attention so much, but the story is headed in the right direction. Moving over to the not great aspects of Green Lantern number 23, here's the piece that I don't like. Sorrow Lantern was going to be a tough sell right from the beginning, when you consider there are still folks who feel that the emotional spectrum was a bad idea all those years ago. Personally, I like the emotional spectrum, but not everybody's on board with it. It convolutes the idea of a Green Lantern, and I can get on board with that approach. Now, Adams takes that concept and dilutes it even more with the creation of a new lantern in this issue called a Disgust Lantern. I'm not even sure what that means. Even I, who is an emotional spectrum fan, am starting to think, well, we're getting too far. That's too much. What's next? A Gratitude Lantern who makes you say thanks? Are we going to get an Anxious Lantern who makes you feel all sweaty and nervous and gets knots in your stomach? It's too much. Adams would be wise to repair the spectrum, be done with this arc, and move on to get rid of all these little in-between emotional lanterns, because it's starting to get a little bit out of hand. Let's switch gears and talk about the art. We have Xermanico, who's back as the main artist, and I gotta say, he steps on the gas with the pacing and action in both plots to craft an issue that's got loads of visual punch and impact. Who wouldn't love to see Hal donning some kind of construct of medieval armor to fight the Spectre in Hell? You get that here. Who wouldn't love to see a thrilling space race with tension, excitement, and a giant tentacled space monster? You get that here too. Xermanico takes Adams' script and runs with it. That's the kind of energy and attention to entertainment that we want to see, both from the writers and the artists. Before we dig in, here's a recap from Green Lantern number 22. Hal outsmarted Hector Hammond on Earth to stop the former supervillain from returning to his villainous ways before he could absorb the minds of other lesser supervillains to regain his telepathic and telekinetic power. The issue ended when Hal returned to his quest to stop Sorrow Lantern by gathering two supernatural heroes, in this case Phantom Stranger and Zuriel, for a one-way ticket to Hell. Hal's trip down under took a weird turn when he found the last person you'd expect to see in the fiery gates of damnation, Gnort. So that brings us to Green Lantern number 23. We begin with Hal's journey into Hell, crossing paths with more than one old acquaintance. Gnort joins Hal's team with Zuriel and Phantom Stranger on this quest to find the next component that will stop or prevent the Sorrow Lantern from building a power battery. As they walk, Gnort gives him the details on how he got in Hell in the first place. He explains he was traveling through the space. He encountered this weird portal, and when he decided to investigate, it turned out it was a Hell gate, and it sucked him into Hell. And since that time, his power ring has run out of power, and he's just been wandering around Hell effectively unprotected. So Gnort is still alive, but he's been trapped in Hell for some time, and honestly, he didn't need to know he was in Hell, which is probably on brand for Gnort. With the exposition out of the way, the travelers eventually come to a prison door that only Zuriel may open because Zuriel comes from heaven. Only a heavenly person can open up a door in hell, or at least in this case, a prison cell. Inside, Hal finds a chained-up alien named Idea, I think is how you say that, who was imprisoned by Hal when Hal was still the Spectre. Hal takes a glowing necklace away from Idea, breaking his promise while he was still a Spectre that Idea could keep it while he was imprisoned because it had a small light on it and it gave him some light in the darkness. It's sort of a symbol of hope. Idea goes ballistic and becomes enraged and swears vengeance against Hal for taking his little bit of hope away. Outside the prison cell, the travelers are confronted by the spirit of the Spectre. Since Jim Corrigan has now passed on, the Spectre has been unable to find a host so that he can appear and do his business on Earth. So he wants Hal to reassume the mantle since he's done it before, and he's right there. He's like, okay, Hal, since I've got you here, let's go. Hal orders his allies to make a break for it back through the Hell Gate while he fights the Spectre. Hal eventually defeats the Spectre, telling the Spirit of Vengeance to find another host because he just doesn't have the strength to do it anymore. You get the impression in that scene that this is somehow setting up another Spectre host, but we're not quite clear how that's going to work out yet. Interspersed within all this action throughout Hell, we get the secondary plot where Kyle, Odyssey, Connell, and Silver Scarab are racing through space being chased by a Reach ship. They're swooping in and out of gas clouds and they're doing all kinds of evasive maneuvers. It's very energetic. It's very exciting. Unfortunately, they run into a big space beast with a really big mouth, lots of very sharp teeth, and lots of tentacles, which eventually it resolves itself. I won't give it away, but it does resolve itself. At the same time, Starbreaker visits Idea in Hell to give him the power he needs to get his revenge on Hal and anyone that's crossed him. And he does it by giving him more of this fractured emotional spectrum power, turning him into, get this, a disgust lantern. Final thoughts, what do we think about Green Lantern number 23 from DC Comics? It takes Hal Jordan to Hell and back again to find the next power battery piece, leading to a run-in with an old enemy and an older spirit. Jeremy Adams tones down the lightheartedness for a tense, urgent issue filled with lots of surprises, which we like, and Zermanico's artwork presents more than one big splashy showpiece, which looks great. That said, another new fractured lantern emerges to make the emotional spectrum even more convoluted than it already is, so it would be better to wrap this arc up sooner rather than later and get rid of the confusion so we can move on to better things. Therefore, Green Lantern number 23 from DC Comics earns an 8.8 out of 10. On the whole, I really like this issue. I thought it was maybe even one of the better ones in this arc so far. But that little bit of convolution at the end is just, it's starting to kind of turn me off a little bit. And I want to enjoy this series. I don't want to be annoyed by it. But what do you think? Are you liking the idea of even more emotional lanterns from different parts of the spectrum? Do you want to see it even get bigger? Maybe that's your thing. It's not for me. If there is going to be another emotional fractured lantern, what emotion should Jeremy Adams do next? I have no idea, but I want to hear your opinion about it. So, thank you very much for joining, and stay tuned through the outro for more reviews just like this one.